Hello. So I'm Thomas Stratmann. I'm a professor of economics at George Mason University, and I have a courtesy appointment at the law school. And I am, at least, I wasn't born in America, as you can hear from my accent. I was born in Germany and went to school over here. And my first job was at the university, was teaching at Montana State University in Bozeman. And I taught there for about 10 years. It was really great. The city changed a lot since then and now, if you know Bozeman. And that stay there sparked my interest in academic work on reservations. Particularly, I've been interested in tribal governance, tribal regulations, how the federal, state, and tribal regulations interact, and in particular also on property rights, freedom to contract, and entrepreneurship in reservations. So this is part of that work. So right now I'm at George Mason University, as it says on the slide, which is outside of Washington, D.C., in Arlington, Virginia, or Fairfax, Virginia. And this is joint work with a PhD student in economics, Olga Shanks. So the one sort of caveat I have to say, so over here, when I read the description of this session, it says, this session explores the administrative challenges between tribal nations and the United States in regarding lease terms. Well, kind of. It's not exactly like that. I mean, I'm describing more, I'm not really describing exactly the negotiations. I'm just sort of describing more the lay of the land in terms of how is the ownership structure on leased land, what are the determinants of income, and it goes towards some of the negotiations going on, but not in the nitty-gritty. So this is really a talk that provides an overview of what exists in terms of, and what determines increased lease income or lower lease income. And when I talk about lease income, I'm not talking about oil and gas leases. I'm not talking about business leases. The data I have, so this is sort of a data-intensive presentation, the data I have is on agricultural leases. So this pertains to agricultural leases, and what we find here may not extend to oil and gas leases or leases on business, so on and so forth. So the goal of this presentation is to show how ownership fractionation of allotted lands affects agricultural lease incomes. Okay? So when we have more or fewer owners, is there some systematic relationship between the number of owners of allotted lands and the lease income obtained from them? And so we're going to look specifically at ownership characteristics in terms of the share. It doesn't matter whether there's one large owner and several small owners. Does it matter whether the tribe has an interest, whether the tribe has a large interest in the allotted land or small interests? And then, based on the results of, in this paper, we're going to describe some potential solutions. So we're just totally data-driven in terms of the data suggests this, so maybe you want to do this, or maybe you want to do that, or you have inside information and you don't want to do any of this stuff. So this is where we are going. So I'm going to start out to set the stage by talking a little bit about the history. History, I'm sure everybody in this room is very familiar with, and I'm going to look at it through the lens of leasing. So it's a little bit, it's very much something but when we talk about allotted lands, I didn't feel like just jumping right into it. I thought, some background to set the stage might be helpful, especially if my understanding is wrong. So you can teach me then and tell me, hey, that you're off over here or you're off over there, because knowing these institutions, as lawyers and economists refer to them, and with institutions I just mean the rule of law or certain regulations, because knowing the institutions and the history is going to be important in terms of how we're going to analyze the data. So it's important to get these things right. So, and then in that context, we're going to talk about the role of the BIA, and that gets a little bit to what I just read from the program, the role of the BIA in terms of negotiation of lands. So we know the Dawes Act, which took reservations and allotted it to individual Indians at 160 acre allotments, and lots of other, the land that wasn't allotted was declared surplus land. So that was sort of the first strike. Well, maybe not, that's probably the wrong word. But I mean, in terms of losing some land on reservations, that led to a loss of millions of acres. And then additionally, when an allottee inherited the land, when someone inherited the land from their father or mother, they were able to sell the land, so leading to extra loss of land. And arguably, the allotment policy destroyed many, many institutions in Indian country, trying to make farmers out of people who used to live a totally different lifestyle, and so basically killing existing institutions by creating fences around 160 acre allotments. So then came along the Indian Organization Act, trying to reverse some of the damage that was done. Indian Reorganization Act gave tribes more control in terms of governance. They had could have their own constitutions, more land management authorities, doing their own regulations. But importantly for our case is that allotted lands were now permanently put into federal trust. Before, you could sell your land perhaps after a certain period, and now everything was in federal trust. So that's kind of the situation we're in right now. So conceptually, we can think about three types of lands on Indian reservations. So there's this individual trust land, which is the focus of this study. So it's held in trust by the federal government, administered by the BIA, and as the legal term goes, is being held in tenancy in common, though I'll come back to that. It's really a special type tenancy of common. It's not the tenancy of common that most non-Indian owners have when they jointly own a house or own a piece of land. Then we have tribally owned trust lands, which held lands communally held by the tribe, so owned by the tribe but held in trust, and then fee simple lands. And so fee simple lands just means you have the full set of property rights. You can sell it, you can lease it, you can build on it. It's yours. You can quote unquote alienate it, meaning selling it. And so we are looking at, these are sort of the situation, this is the situation of lands on reservation these days. And the focus here is going to be on individual trust lands. We're not going to look at tribal trust lands right now. Of course, tribes lease their lease as well, and I will touch on that very briefly. But we're looking at individual trust lands because here you have the, well, I don't know if it's interesting, but here you have the fact that there are some allotted lands with many, many owners, some allotted lands with few owners, and we're interested in studying how this sort of mix of distribution of ownerships, tribe versus, tribes who have a partial interest in individual trust lands, and in the mix of individual and tribal ownership and the number of ownership all interact in terms of understanding what generates higher lease income and lower income lease income, again, focusing on agricultural leases. So let's go then to talk for a second about fractionation of allotted land. So as we know, fractionation refers, in in very general terms, we can think of fractionation as land being divided into smaller and smaller pieces of ownership. And so one may want to ask, what is the cause of fractionation? And actually, fractionation didn't only happen over here. It's also happened actually in totally different contexts in the South with African Americans. They faced during the Civil War, I believe, they faced similar issues. But that was an aside. So, causes of fractionation. Initially, of course, there were restrictions on inheritance, and so that was until 1910, and the BIA still today is approving, to the best of my knowledge, is approving wills. So it's costly to write a will, or if you write a will, you know the BIA is going to scrutinize it. It will take a while of course, go into probate, and so this is still a process going on nowadays. And then what happened after, between 1934, the date of the Indian Reorganization Act, and 2004, the date of the American Indian Probate Reform Act, during that time, partitioning was prohibited. So if I own a piece of land with my brother, say I own 60% and my brother owns 40%, we cannot just simply come to an agreement and say, hey, I have 60% of the land, I do with it what I want, you have 40% of the land, you do with it what I want. So that was sort of, it's referred to as partitioning. That would be an efficient way of perhaps of farming the land. But this wasn't possible. So if you own it jointly, you own it jointly. And so this then, and then, of course, if the previous owner didn't leave a will, for example, the ownership, all the children incurred the ownership share proportional to what their father or mother had in equal shares. And of course, the other reason also, one problem why buying out didn't really happen, or buying the other interest out didn't really happen, is because you had these mortgage restrictions. If you wanted to buy your friend, your buddy out, you couldn't go to the bank and get a mortgage because the bank is not giving you a mortgage. So you didn't have any capital to buy out your friend or your brother, so on and so forth. So all these things contributed to fractionation over time, and that is one issue. But fractionation itself may not be such a problem because owners may be able to overcome sort of, using lingo, collective action problems. They may be able to overcome the problem in terms of, may come to an agreement. But there is a special type of tenancy in common on Indian allotted lands. So if I own a house, tenancy in common, with my friend or friends, I can go anywhere in the house. I can cook my meal anywhere in the house. I mean, within reason, I guess, and I can use the house for whatever I kind of want to. And tenancy in common typically, outside of reservations, is ownership by choice. People choose to get together with others and jointly own something. And everybody has clear exit options. I can sell my share. Not possible in Indian country on reservations. You cannot sell your share to another private owner. You are basically stuck. I can mortgage my share if I do tenancy in common outside of reservations. You cannot do it on reservations. So tenancy in common on reservations is really a special type of tenancy in common which really, really restricts ownership rights, where you're basically stuck. And so then what happened after the Indian Reorganization Act, the BIA or the federal government, whoever you want to refer to, they realized, they have these different owners. There's this 70% owner, and then there's these other 30 owners who have 1%. and they came up with the idea of protecting other co-owners. That's why I have protecting in quotation marks, meaning, they were concerned maybe the big owner is going to screw over the small owners. So they came up with the idea that they're going to lease allotted lands. So now from then on, the ABA basically, they felt it as, quote unquote, their responsibility to lease allotted lands on owners' behalf if they did not come to an agreement. Now, Jessica Shoemaker, some of you guys may know, a law professor, she is very sort of critical about this, and she's arguing, if you now take these lands and lease them on behalf of Indians, you basically take entrepreneurial opportunities away from the owners. The owners now are just going to be recipients of lease income. They cannot, develop an entrepreneurial spirit to work on these lands themselves. And I think there is certainly something said to this. So basically, what happens on allotted lands, leasing to third parties has become the dominant options. So conceptually, we can think about tribal or leasing of Indian lands in three categories. Well, one is what I have over here, the individual land without tribal ownership, individual trust land. Then we have individual trust land with some tribal ownership, and then we have tribally owned land. So the first two categories, this one over here and this one over here, are governed by the same rules. Tribes have leasing rules, and these type of lands have to comply with the tribal leasing rules. They have to leases have to comply as well with BIA rules, and the BIA, after about after 3 months, or as the CFR says, 90 days, after 3 months, and the landowners cannot come to an agreement, the BIA goes out and advertises the land and leases it out. And supposedly it's done to protect the Indian landowners' interests and done for often minors, legally incompetent, and so on and so forth. But basically this happens, BIA goes out and leases out allotted land. In contrast, if you have tribally owned land, then the tribes, these leases, for leases on tribally owned land, they're largely the tribes tribal regulations govern what happens, and the BIA actually, through the 638 contracts or other ways, they can give tribes a lot of leeway on creating their own, on deciding to whom to lease to. So the fact that tribes decide to whom to lease and also create their own regulations, that might potentially create a conflict of interest, but that's not really the goal over here. And also, that being said, in terms of when I describe this sort of broadly, when I've been interviewing several treatment people on tribal reservations and also BIA officers in agencies, and it seems like every reservation sort of follows different regulations. There's a very huge mix. Sometimes for tribal lands, the BIA advertises. Sometimes tribal lands, the tribe itself advertises. And again, huge mix out there. And so, I welcome comments in terms of, especially as they pertain to what I'm going to show you in a second in terms of the data, whether we are considering all the relevant factors. So what's the role of the BIA? Real quick, is overseeing leasing and management. It does appraisal service, advertisement. Advertisement usually happens in the tribal newspaper, at least in the cases most I've seen. So the market, so to speak, where the piece of land is being advertised is relatively small. And usually it's an auction, the blind auction, so highest bidder wins. However, the tribes, can often override if the tribe finds someone else or then you can, the BIA will agree to what the tribe may want. And also, if you want to lease it, to your brother or something like that, the BIA is happy to say, well, you only have to pay a penny or nothing or something like that. So some lease values are really, really low, and that is just because the owners agree. You can have this land to farm, to lease it, and we don't want any compensation. And so BIA does a bunch of verifying the compliance, so on and so forth, and then comes to the lease payment. The lease payment, in about 95% of all cases, as I have seen, goes basically directly to the BIA, and the BIA distributed to the owners, to the Indian owners, via their individual Indian money accounts. However, on some reservations, for example, on the Crow and the Pine Ridge and several others, there's a small fraction of owners who receive direct pay. They're being paid directly by the person who leases. And that's something I'm going to come back to in a second, because it tells us, I think, something about who is doing the negotiation, and then it's going to lead into when are lease payments a little bit higher and when are they going to be lower. So what are the data we're considering? Our data are on agricultural leases between 2006 and 2010. So, if you look at the dollar values, you will see in a second that, lease per acre maybe is $100 nowadays. In that time nowadays, maybe it'd be equivalent to $150 multiplied times 1.5. We got this data from the BIA. They were totally anonymized. We don't know who is the lease owner. We don't know the name of the owners of the land. The only thing we know is the lease income and the reservation where the lease was signed, and we know the number of owners on the ownership shares of the tracts over which the lease was signed. And we consulted the Office of Research and Integrity and Assurance that's done at academic institutions to verify that you play by the rules, basically, in terms of confidentiality, so on and so forth. So our data, how do they look? Over here, it's the third bullet. If you look at our data, we have 34% of the parcels. A parcel is a piece of land that is being leased. In this context, is owned by a sole owner. 41% is owned by 2 to 20 owners, and a quarter of all parcels are more than 20 owners. And that's 20 owners. We'll see in a second. It can be many, many more than 20 owners, as you well know. And we're looking at a total of about 9,500 leases in our data set that have been signed, agricultural leases that have been signed between 2006 and 2010. So here is sort of a first look at the raw data in terms of, if you look at the left-hand side diagram, it's the distribution of interest of the largest shareholder. So here on the horizontal axis, you have one means a person owns 100% of the shares. So, basically, this means one owner. So we have about 800 leases where there's only going to be one owner. Then you see over 50% of the shares, another spike. So that basically there are going to be two owners, and that's another 800. You see another spike at 33%, where there are going to be probably three equal owners, another spike at 25%. Then you see a big mass over here, where the largest shareholder has maybe 15%, 10%, or 20% of the undivided interest. And this over here, this graph to the left top, I should have done this differently. It says it's the distribution of number of owners. I apologize, that's why I read this, because it's impossible to read. from where you're sitting, the title. But the title over here says distribution of the number of owners. Over here on this axis, the number of owners goes from 0 to 1,500. We actually have some plots where there are 1,500 owners. But you don't see this over here because there are just so few over here. So it's sort of being swamped by the number of plots with only one owners. So this should be what we're doing. In the bottom right-hand side, another look at the data, distribution of interest owned by the tribe. So 0, so we're going to have about 500 parcels where the tribe doesn't own anything in the parcel for which the lease is being signed. And here you see, on the all other parcels, there are about 100 parcels for where the tribe owns 40%, 100 parcels where the tribe owns 60%, 70%, so on and so forth. You see the spike over here at 50%. It's just, the tribe probably bought out one of the two owners of the land. So that's just, raw look at the data. And here, one other look at the data. So it's a little confusing the way I did this. I think I overdid it. Look at the key is here to look at these horizontal lines. Okay. So basically, what this says. So basically, this over here says this is the share of. So there are. If there's only one shareholder, the largest shareholder is owning 30% of the parcel. This says the top two owners together own about 50%. The top 5 owners own about 80%. And when there are, the share of the top 10 owners own about 90%. Just a different view of the data. And so let's go towards the sort of analysis of the data, besides having described the data. So what affects lease? So I said before that the BIA, according to the CFR, is going in after 90 days and leases the allotted land if the owners cannot come to an agreement. What affects lease income? Certainly the quality of the land, the marketing efforts, negotiation efforts of the BIA. These are things I do not observe, so we're not going to look at the land quality. We're going to focus on, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're going to look at the ownership concentration, how ownership concentration affects lease income. So think about it. Think about it. We have a tract. There's going to be one owner with 60%, and there are going to be another 40 owners. Each of them owns only 1% of the land. So clearly, the 1% owner have very little incentive to participate in the lease negotiation, very little incentive to nudge the BIA, prodding the BIA to maybe find a better deal. And so, however, the large owner with 60% has a very strong incentive, to try to find maybe someone to get a good deal, try to nudge the BIA to get the BIA to advertise aggressively, maybe on a broader scale than just the local newspaper. And the small owners are basically free riding, as people refer to it. Basically, they know the big guy is going to do it, and the 60% person is going to do it, and so they are going to let that person act. So, given these considerations, so we expect that the highest, that's what I have at the bottom when I say the upshot, the higher the interest of the largest owner, the stronger his or her incentive to obtain high lease payments. So what we expect is the more the concentration of ownership, that means concentration of ownership meaning higher share, at least in one way of looking at it, higher share, one person has a higher share of total ownership, then the better the outcome being the lease income. So here, we did this. Here's sort of a visualization of a pattern you see in the data. Again, these are just raw data. We're going to do a little bit of a statistical analysis where we adjust for lease characteristics like the term and whether whether it is on reservation A versus reservation B, because that may be relevant, because there might be some irrigation on some reservations and some are not. We're going to adjust for those things later, but we're going to start out by just describing the data. What kind of patterns do we see in the raw data? So what we have on the left-hand side is on the horizontal axis, we have the interest of the largest shareholder. So this is for people who own 20%, this guy 60% ownership, one meaning one person is the sole owner. The size of the circles tells us the number of leases we have for that observation. So over here, the one owner this size says it's about 1,000 leases for that size. And if it's very tiny over here, this means there are about 19 leases. So it just sort of tells you roughly where the distribution of ownership lies. So we have, this because we have so many big circles over here, this tells there's lots of land out there, a lot of land, where the larger shareholder has maybe 20%, 30%, 40%. That tells you the big circles. And there's less land out here, less land out there, a lot of land, where the larger shareholder has 70, 60, or 80%. So, and then when you sort of put a line through this, which statisticians may call a regression line, this is sort of the best fit. You see the positive slope, meaning it increases. It goes from the left bottom to the top right. What does it tell us? It tells us the larger the shareholder interest, the higher the lease income. It's kind of what I mentioned before. Because the guy who has the larger your share of ownership, the more of an incentive you have to prod the BIA to maybe advertise more broadly, or to find a person yourself who's going to lease the land. And then on the right-hand side, we have, over here on the vertical, I should have said this, over here on the vertical axis, the annual income per acre. Okay, that's income per acre. So you see, the positive slope over here, or going from the bottom left to the top right, though not that steep, says as the interest of the larger shareholder increases, the income per acre, the lease income per acre, is increasing. And there's this question, if you have a microphone. I mean, it goes without saying, interrupt me whenever you feel like.
I happen to be an appraiser, so I'm going to have a little issue with your stuff.
Okay.
On the previous slide, you state that there are 3 primary causes that affect income: land quality, marketing, right? And so this curve does not address the impact of any of those.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I said these are just the raw data. Okay? I'm going to address that in my next slide. I mean, maybe I don't address it to your satisfaction, and there's, it's totally fair to say what I'm going to show in a second. There are some limitations. There's always limitations, and maybe some limitations are fatal, some are not. It's your call. This is just the raw data, unadjusted for land quality, irrigation, so on and so forth. So I bring this forward because if I find the same pattern when I do a more sophisticated analysis by adjusting for other factors, then I'm kind of more comforted in these results. I mean, you can massage, statistics, you can massage data left and right, and you get kind of, as they, I don't think it's exactly true, but you can get a lot of different results, depending on how you massage kind of your data. But if I find a pattern in the raw data, and I see it confirmed when I do a more sophisticated analysis, then I'm more comforted in the result. That is what motivates, in part, just showing you the raw data. And on the right-hand side, we also have agricultural income, annual income, lease income per acre on the vertical axis. And on the right-hand side, we have the number of owners. Again, this cuts it off over here. We have tracts out there that have 1,500 owners, but we cut them off over here at 200, just to illustrate the point. And you see, there are many big circles means lots of tracts with 3, 4, 5 to 25 owners. Then, there are fewer tracts over here, which many owners. But the red line over here is pretty much flat, meaning the number of owners. So while these raw numbers suggest that if you have, if someone has a larger share, then you get of ownership. If you, if you have 70%, 80%, those leases have higher income. The raw number of owners doesn't seem to matter in the just descriptive statistics. So here now, we're going to do something addressing, at least in part, the concern that was raised before by estimating a so-called regression. We're going to explain income per acre, and we're going to control for a bunch of lease characteristics for whether you're on reservation A versus B, the year, so on and so forth. And I'm sure there are more things we could control for if we would have, access to better data, but it is what it is. And so basically what you have over here is the predicted effect of income per acre. Over here it's the positive, left is negative, and I'll tell you in a second how to interpret these numbers. And these over here are just the variables we control for, other ones I don't mention, but we're really interested in the share of the largest shareholder. And so, which basically, the way to interpret this over here, and this is why I wrote this, so an increase in the interest of the largest shareholder from 10 to 20% leads to about $3 increase in annual lease income, which is about 3.4% of the mean. So if the mean income is, $100, that means basically you get $3.50 more if the larger shareholder increases his or her share. If you compare if you compare a lease with 10% larger shareholder versus a lease 20% larger shareholder. And again, this effect is kind of diminishing. If you go from 50 to 60%, you basically find still an increase, but it's less strong. So then we're going to do the same. Remember in the pictures I showed you, the number of owners was kind of flat, but when we use the number of owners to explain income, we actually find that the number of owners matters. The larger the number of owners, the lower your lease income. It's just because you have probably more and more people with a smaller and smaller share. So if you increase the number of owners from 1 to 5, or let's think about it differently perhaps. If you compare a lease where it's one owner versus a lease if you compare an allotted land with a lease where there is one owner, compare it with a lease on allotted land where there is 5 owners, where there is 5 owners, the lease income is about 0.8% lower or 1% lower. Okay, or if you go compare one owner versus 10 owners, there the lease income is about 1.4% lower. So, fractionation or larger owners decrease the lease income. Now, I mentioned that there are some tracts that are not just owned by individuals or individual Indians, they are partly owned by the tribe. And there actually you find an interesting pattern. So now I'm going to look at only leases, the subset of leases, where the tribe has a bit of an ownership, or at least some ownership. Actually, no, I take this back. This over here, okay, let's go. This is tribe interest. So here, 0 tribe interest. Here are the leases where there's 0 tribe interests. And again, the size of the circle tells you how many leases there are. Again, the vertical axis is annual income. And so here are the different dots. And if you put a line through it, you see that the larger the tribal interest in an allotted tract or allotted land, the larger the lease income. So you may want to think, why is this the case? And I'm sure, you know this much better than I am. My instinct is, tribal government to federal government or tribal government to BIA is a government-to-government relationship. And so the tribe holds some swing. And so the tribe may nudge the BIA to be more aggressive in terms of lease negotiations than if they're individual owners. That is one story that explains the positive relationship. I'm sure there are other ones. And then the right-hand side just compares leases with tribal owners, the left-hand side with leases where there are no tribal owners. It kind of shows something very similar as over here. Here, just divide the sample into leases with tribal owners and those without. And over here, again, vertical axis is the income per acre. Over here, you have the interest of the larger shareholder on the horizontal axis. And what I take away from this picture is that these dots over here, they're much higher than the right-hand side dots, which means if there's any tribal ownership, there's going to be more income from the lease than if there's no tribal ownership. So I'm just, I'm just comparing basically, there's a shift upwards in terms of income. And then this is just sort of, if you don't, again, the previous slide was this over here. Again, that's the raw data, unadjusted for anything. And then I adjust things via regression analysis, controlling for lease characteristics, so on and so forth. I can give you an exact number. And then, increasing the share owned by the tribe by 10 percentage points. So going, for example, from 20% to 30%, increases the lease income by roughly 2%. Yeah, over here it says 1.7%. And also if the tribe is the larger shareholder, there's an extra kick in terms of extra income. Lastly, I'm coming to the end of this. I mentioned about the distinction between agency pay and direct pay. So agency pay, I would refer to as, I would define or call, or is called, when the person who leases gives the lease payment to the BIA, and the BIA is then putting it into the individual money accounts, and then each owner receives a check or a little bit of an increase in his or her money account. Direct pay is the leasee pays directly. And so what do I see over here in these data? So this over here is the proportion of direct leases, and this is whether you're a large share. So this is very fractionated. One over here means it's only one owner. You see, predominantly when there's one owner, you're going to get direct pay. All right, it's more likely direct pay. Again, this happens only on a relatively few reservations. And also this over here, again, is the proportion of direct leases. And again, here are a few owners. This actually should be one owner. Again, it's basically the bottom line is that when you observe direct pay, where the lessee pays directly to the owner, there what you have is higher lease income actually. And why is that the case? Well, I'm guessing is because if you're just one or two owners, you do your own negotiations, then you go to the BIA and say, well, let me have the money go to me directly, and this sort of, direct pay is an indication that there the person negotiated by himself or herself and got a better deal than if the BIA had negotiated it for them. But this is sort of work in progress. I have to better understand direct pay and the sources of it. And again, it happens roughly in about 30 or 40 reservations in the US. Most of the reservations, that's just, the BIA agent says, we don't do direct pay. We only do agency pay. So that's a difference from reservation to reservation. So what's the conclusion in terms of, recommendations, way to go forward? We saw what I learned from these data is that fractionation really affects lease income through the ownership concentration. The larger the concentration of ownership, the higher the lease income. So how can we, or how would owners go about increasing lease income? Well, reducing the cost of participation, perhaps, in negotiation, maybe using face groups, people, of people owning one tract or something, getting together via chats or meetings, and then maybe have a representative who is then directly talking to, or appointing a representative who directly talks to the BIA, and encourages also each person to write a will to allot your land to only one person. And the BIA can help. It can facilitate these type of things, It can help by, well, first, of course, that's kind of a different topic, helping to simplify the process of writing wills and enforcing wills. But the BIA, given they have an office on the reservation, they can facilitate those meetings. They could encourage people to get together, and the co-owners, and get together on the agency properties and come to an agreement in terms of how to proceed, in terms of finding someone to take a lease and to appoint people or appoint a person to directly have interactions with the BIA with the goal to advertise broadly, negotiate tough, to get increased lease income. And I appreciate the time you took out of your busy schedule to attend this conference and this session. I love to hear comments. If you have any comments to share, either here or please send me an email to inform me where I may want to go with this, where I'm wrong. That's especially useful to know. And in terms of, I love to analyze data, and if there's more, I love to look more into understanding the dynamics on the res. Thank you.
Excuse me, I got a couple of questions. And this is through experience with our own BIA. When BIA signs the lease for absent landowners, how do they interpret who has the larger land? Yeah, we have an individual that owns the majority of the land, and when he didn't sign the lease, the BIA went to the number of heirs that were also on the land, and he took their numbers, so the larger guy doesn't have any input. Or how would you determine who has the larger say in allowing a lease to come through? An individual with the most of the land, or a group of heirs that have less land? I know what it should be, but I'm just wondering from you guys.
I'm not trying to describe necessarily how it should be. What I see in the data is that when you have when there is a larger share, when you own a larger share, that's when you find that lease income is higher. Whether the BIA approaches that individual or approaches some other individuals, I cannot observe. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, I don't, but anyway, I think we kind of got that cleared up back home, okay. I think.
Yeah, okay.
BIA's got a lot of little tricks in their bag, so. You kind of mentioned a little bit about here where if a tribe has interest in a lot of land, that generally the landowner or the allottee gets a higher income because the tribe is involved. I've seen a lot of our leases come through to our leadership where the allottees have already negotiated an amount to given to them, but the tribes held out for more. The allottees did not get that increase because the same increase as the tribe did. Is that considered normal, or should the allottees get the higher amount with the tribes?
My understanding from the regulations is that everybody should get paid the share of their interest, regardless who negotiated the deal.
Okay. Well, that's logical.
Yep. I mean, I'm sure in practice there are maybe there are probably ways to get around it.
Yeah. Well, sometimes the tribe has issues with the allottees because the allottees say, don't you dare negotiate on my behalf, that's mine.
Yeah.
And so we kind of get turned back from them. And then when they find out we get more, they're all mad. They say, well, that's what you wanted, that's what you got. So anyway, the amount of land that is, or the amount of money that is given to an acre of land, and we heard a guy come up here and kind of correct you a little bit about what goes on with that. A lot of the times when we look at the prices of the land given by the appraisers, really doesn't match up to what the land should be worth. And the tribes have always indicated that, we would like to sit down and look at this appraisal portion. On our reservation, they don't come out to the land. They do these desktop appraisals. And I'm not really happy with a lot of that because you just don't know. The tribes negotiated our water agreement, and so we've, because we're an agricultural reservation, we have all of the water in the world to put on the land. But it doesn't seem to be a part of the appraisal process. So when the tribes say, well, what about the water? Who's paying for the water? You can't get free water. But the BIA kind of fights us on that, and they say, and eventually they tell us, well, that's a part of the whole appraisal, and we said, bullshit. You've never mentioned that before. We don't think it's there now. Do you think that water should be a part of the appraisal?
Okay, let me go out on a limb here and say something that's not part of what I'm doing over here. But it seems like water rights are central to using land for agricultural purposes. So it seems like it should be part of valuing the land.
Okay. Well, I agree with you on that. But we just need to get the BIA to agree to that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't know. I would love to learn more about the ins and outs, how the BIA appraises things. So
come to Fort Hall, you'll find out. Let's see. I had one more, but I forgot to write it down. And is there a way that the tribes, a lot of times the BIA appraisals don't come up right away. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years. Is there, to your knowledge, is there any way of kicking the BIA in the butt to get these appraisals in a lot earlier? Because when somebody wants to sell their land, and it's usually because of an emergency. Well, they don't get their land, payment for the land until months or even years later. Is there a process that can be used to make these appraisals come in a lot quicker and faster?
I don't know of an official process, but from the experience I had in talking to people on reservations and agencies, it seems like if you can get the tribal government to advocate for you to the superintendent, that may help, because all these things are done at the very local level in my experience. But that's not really an official channel.
Well, that's no help with the kick in the butt to the BIA. That brought up another question, I guess you could say, is that could the tribes, well, maybe I'm talking to the wrong person. Is that BIA guy in here? Where'd he go? But anyway, thanks for the information, and I guess we'll just continue to deal with the BIA. You know, a few decades ago, we had a BIA superintendent that came to the reservation, and he was looking at the amount of lease that was being given out to the tribes and to the allottees. And then he looked at the farmer. He says, why is it that these farmers, or corporate farmers, they're corporate farmers now is what they are on our reservation anyway, how is it that they can afford $1 million homes and the landowner is still living in a HUD home? His question kind of raised a lot of eyebrows on our reservation. So there was a huge attempt at that time to start increasing the leases. But he evidently, the rest of the BIA didn't like that. So they transferred him out. And since then, we still have these $1 million homes owned by the corporate farmers, and we still live in HUD homes. So I think, the tribes need to start stepping up to tell these corporate farmers that no more $1 million homes for you. We would like at least a good, decent home to live in that's not HUD. Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing? So I have a question. You're doing data, right? So my question pertains to if you're going to start, if looking at leasing and you're going to raise the allotted prices, with the data, does that look like it's going to impede on native agriculture to bring more non-natives onto the reservation to lease native land, creating revenue for non-natives, not the native revenue? Data, from a data standpoint, is that by increasing allotted land leases, the prices on it, where you're not going to have a lot of native producers that are able to afford those leases, but a non-native is going to be able to come in on the and afford those leases, therefore taking that economic revenue off of the reservation, away from the tribe. And then on top of it, even if you do increase the leases statically, it's not looking out for the betterment of the allottee by giving them say they're getting $3 a person on that lease, to maybe they might get $5. Because we all know from most of our tribes, most of our leasees, if they're on allotted land, there's so many of them that the price isn't going to cover, it's not going to give them a real check. They're going to get $3. They're going to get, so I've heard of people getting 80 cents on the lease, So I mean, really, from a data standpoint, that's what we're looking at, and we've talked about that with Village Earth, just what the economic revenue loss for the tribes raising those allotted lands takes away from tribal people and tribal producers, bringing more non-natives onto the reservation, allowing them to make that revenue, leaving the Indians behind, taking the revenue off the reservation.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Very good points. So in the data I have, for example, I do not know whether the leasee is an Indian or non-Indian. So I do not know who exactly pays. So were the lease payments to increase, it is, if currently locals are basically buying the lease, it's potentially that would squeeze them out. That's your concern. I do not know exactly how large that effect is in terms of, is it affecting a few people? Is it affecting many people? One comment to that, though, is, with higher lease incomes, more revenue flows back. I mean, you are arguing, it's only $1 or $2, but I mean, overall, I mean, if someone pays, I'm just picking something out of the hat, 15 versus $10,000 or something like that. Yes, these extra 5,000 are going to distribute it over many people, but then, I mean, many people have interest in many different allotted lands. So I mean, maybe these $5 add up if you have interest in 20 different parcels. So bottom line is, I cannot say exactly how it would affect people on the res, because partly I don't know how many people would be squeezed out or how many people are taking advantages of this in the first place in terms of leasing. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Antonelli Anton, and I work with land for a long time. I would just want to point out to answer this man's question, and from what I know, the first question you asked was, you said this person had majority interest of the land. Say there's 10 acres. He had the majority interest, say 30 or 40 acres. There's still 60%. He may say, no, I don't want my land developed. But those 60% people can override that majority. So even though, say there's 100 landowners within that 10 acres, 25, say your person's had, like I said, maybe 25%, and say there's 99 landowners was left over of that 25%. If all those, they have small parcels, but those parcels add up. They add up to where, like I said, they override the majority. Just so they have that 51%, they can lease that land or develop it. I'm going to jump into the farmers. The farmers that cooperate, say the same 10 acres. You're leasing your land to a farmer or to a developer. It doesn't matter how much the farmer or developers make. They can make $1,000, they can make millions of dollars. But that person in their home is only getting what he's leasing. If he has a small percent, he gets a small income. If he has a large percent, he gets a large income. This is what he was talking about, that the landowners, it depends on how much interest you have. But through the farmers and developers, you'll never get those $1 million because you're just leasing that land. So that's what I know, and there's probably more, because right now I'm the only, I represent 200 to 500 landowners. I'm from Hill River, but I have land in Salt River. And we have 2 parcels of land that I'm a spokesman for. Each one probably has 200 plus landowners. And if you go to Salt River, where they call it Butterfly World, but the whole development is Odyssey. I'm a spokesperson for those people because I have land there. I have a small parcel. Then have south of there's the, I think it's Golf Spot or, but it's a large development also. They're making millions. But like me, like I said before, I only have a small portion from both sides. I'm not a millionaire. I'm just get what I can. I'm probably that same person that lives in a hut home. You can see development going, but you never get it because you're just leasing. You're getting your leases from your land. Some people, elders don't want to give up their land for, they want the farmers to keep leasing their land. But that lease, 1 year lease from a farmer, that's what they depend on. That's why they don't want farmers to be, let the land go and be developed. So this is what I can just say for now, but there's, like I said, I don't remember the other questions, but those are the only two I can think of. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Danny Gonzalez. I work for Caldwell Chubble Real Estate. I have an answer for you. Right, so we want our lands to keep producing income. Okay, so whoever wants to come in and farm the land, till the land, work the land, develop the land, we want that because the more land we have that's holds value, the more we can use. Right, so what we have back home is we have development leases. So if a person wants to lease it, they'll lease it at a lower value and develop the land inside 5 or 10 years. It'll be a turnkey operation for a tribal member to come in and get that money for the full process, right? So one of the reasons that sometimes the lessee doesn't get all the money from the farmer, they don't have the $1 million grain trucks, they don't have the big huge machines, the whole combines, the whole bit. But with a turnkey operation, you can. So, excuse me, my allergies are killing me today, I can't really talk. So that's why a lot of lands are it's a good idea. Anybody wants to come into to get it moving, get it tilled up, get it producing, give them a development lease. 5 years later, give it to an enrolled member in the bid process, a blind bid process, get them in and give them the ability to match the non-native, right? Of course, it's make it all even, of course, right? And then we win, right? It's horrible to say it that way, but I'm all for us winning because we lost for a long time, so.
Winning and sustainability.
Yes,
right?
yes, sir.
Sustainability.
That's the thing too, is that once,
One of the sustainabilities we need that I think a lot of Indian folks that we forget because we're so far in the future is we still need to feed our people to survive.
yeah, and that's the
So
key.
when it comes down to it, money's not going to feed it really. We got to have land, we got to have education for our younger people to grow. We got to have these processes set up so it makes it easier for our younger generations to get into agriculture, to be able to provide for our tribes. Instead of just leasing it out, saying, okay, this is my farmer. You do all the work, you give us a check, and then we're doing better because you give us a check, but we're not sustaining ourselves.
So one of the keys to sovereignty is food sovereignty, right? And one of the ways to get food sovereignty is that develop land. I don't have a tractor. Do you? Okay, because I don't, right? But I also have 1.6 million acres of tribal land I need to develop. Okay, from a real estate person's perspective, right? I have to get that land working. So food sovereignty and production aren't a reality for me yet. But if I get a lot of lands moving, tilling, making money, right, turning over, then that reality becomes possible.
And then when you're matching, when you're giving the tribal member the option to match,
Come here.
when you're giving the tribal member the option to match,
You mind?
the leasee, how much reality is it for that tribal member to actually match that leasee? What's the reality in that tribal member saying, say your lease is going for $10,000 a year,
Yeah.
production and everything. What's your reality in that tribal member being able to match that non-native to be able to farm their own land?
Okay, so what happened in that was that the bid process, right, people were getting outbid, right? Big farmers were just throwing money at it. So what we did to fix that was that we said, okay, the minimum bid is say $1,000. So you bid it, non-tribal bids it, and you match. You open them up, they're matched. You as a tribal member have the ability to bid more without bidding. So it becomes a reality. The problem we have back home is that none of the kids believe or see there's any money in agriculture. So as long as I can get one tribal member, one kid to turn over and make real money at it, all of a sudden maybe the drug problems will go away.
Yeah.
Maybe the other huge problem we have will go away because it's a sustainability thing where they can make money at it and not deal drugs.
So if we're trying to show our kids that there is sustainability in agriculture, wouldn't we want to make it easier for them to lease production land to be able to produce off of that land and make the income off of it? Or do we want to put them in the bureaucratic system of trying to lease against a non-native on their own reservation?
there's merits to that discussion, but the reality comes into, I don't know very many skins that know how to farm. I don't know lots of skins that know the ins and outs, the crop rotation, the ability to let, even simple terms, fallow and yield, right?
So I worked with intertribal agriculture, and that's what we do.
Okay.
We go to these tribes, we bring that education, we bring these youth summits. I know a lot of Indians that know that process. I mean, it's just demographically, you know, of where maybe your tribe's in the city versus our Rocky Mountain region or Nevada region or Oregon region, Idaho region, where agriculture is our only economy. So if you don't work for the tribe or you don't work in agriculture, you probably won't go to a border town and get a job. So you got two options there. Work for the tribe or agriculture, or you don't work. So like our purpose is to start showing younger kids, younger generations, that there is value in agriculture, there's sustainability, there's economic uplift in agriculture, but it's bringing that education versus saying, well, I know you guys, this half don't know how to do it, so you guys just accept your check. But I know this half knows how to do it, so you guys will be all right, so you guys are gonna win. And you guys just accept your check because you guys don't know how to do it, so that's it. You know what I mean? Versus, well, there's this half of the room, we're gonna bring the education, we're gonna make sure all the Indians know how to prosper off their land. We're gonna make sure they know how to do that. As me, as an older generation, that's our job, to teach, right?
Yeah.
And not just say, well, I know you don't know how to farm, so the best interest is to give it to the white guy that knows how to farm.
So,
You know?
I'm a Colville, right? Washington State, right? Most of our money came from timber, right? We got a Grand Coulee, we're one of the largest Grand Coulee dams, concrete dams in the world on our res, right? So we got money coming in, but there's more to be had. It's horrible to say that, but we make money, that's what we do. So, you ever heard the expression, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it
Oh,
drink? Yeah? Same thing with education. You can pour education to the side of the room all you want. If they don't want to learn it, they're not gonna learn nothing. Okay? But one kid over here who makes money at a farm, this whole room will pay attention real quick and come to you to learn. Right? So if we focus on one small thing, maybe we can fix the bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly. You're looking at the overall sustainability of your people.
Danny Gonzalez, by the way.
Craig Harry,
Nice to meet you.
Rocky Mountain Technical Assistant.
We'll have to have you come up and talk to our kids.
Yes, sir. We have our technical assistant that's in your region here,
Okay.
you know, and then she does a lot of training, she does a lot of other stuff.
Good deal. I want you to class too.
It's just a system that has to be thought about in a different context, because we can't just keep saying, we're like kind of in this generation, well, it's money, it's money, it's money, it's money. Well, then our original values, we still got to go back to our original, I know it's 2023, but we got to remember our original values as Native people and what those core texts are, because that's the reason we're still here.
I hear
That's
that.
the reason we didn't get killed off.
Yeah.
You know, so it's those core values, even though you're thinking money, business, 2023, it's those core values that's keeping your tribe alive, and that's that land. You know, don't sell out while I'm at it.
I hear you all the way, right?
So,
But
yeah.
with money, helps us to appreciate our values a little bit better, right? If we're broke poor, we can have values all day long, but
That's
like I
what-
said, it gives us
That's what
a,
we're talking about, like that leasing on reservations, where you're leasing it to a white guy. They're not spending that money at your tribal stores. They're not spending that money at anything on the tribe. They're taking all that money that they're generating off that revenue, taking it to the next town.
Oh.
So none of your tribal communities are receiving any of that farmer's money in taxes or in anything. You're receiving what, like, for example, my father-in-law has an 80-acre piece that he leases out, $1,500 before I married my wife. $1,500 a year he gets. That farmer generates over $500,000 a year off that 80 acres selling hay. Doesn't spend $1 on the reservation of that $500,000, but he pays the Indians and the tribe $1,500 a year. But that's good because we're getting a check, right?
no, it's not good. And that's a cause to understand your value, okay? And if your value isn't being appreciated, then that needs to be addressed, right? The other thing that comes into is that most leases I have multiple stipulations. So if you do a lease for me, right? Say you're non-tribal, right? You're gonna pay your money You're also going to give 3 scholarships to 3 kids. You're also going to give so much hay to our tribal range program,
yeah.
right? So that you're benefiting the tribe.
Good deal.
Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly how the thought process
We're
should
getting
be
started
going.
out here.
And it's going to benefit it.
I just wanted to make a last comment. I'm Sharon Sudman, and I'm with ILTF, one of the sponsors. I'm a volunteer, and I don't see staff in here, so I think we went from data to some really great policy discussions, and I really want to hear more. So if you want to input on that, please let me know, and maybe we'll try to set up a panel discussion next year. Okay? Thank you.